Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here tonight. My name is Dina Sayedahmed, and I'm with the Council on American Islamic Relations. And with me today is Ayah Zaki, who is the lead civil rights attorney on our team at CAIR-NJ. And we're here today to talk about mostly the federal watch list and how that implicates Arabs and Muslims in the US today, more than 20 years after 9/11. So we'll talk a little bit about the history of it. We'll talk a little bit about the work that we've done around it, or the work that Ayah has done around it specifically, and more about what are the constitutional rights and the civil procedures that are being violated in this watch list case. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Ayah if you want to introduce yourself and give a short intro and just a little bit about what we've been doing about the watch list with the cases that we've got at CAIR-NJ.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that introduction, Dina. My name is Ayah. I'm a civil rights attorney at CAIR. I think this topic is more pertinent than ever, given the developments in Palestine and the impacts and implications it has had on our community. The rise in community members who've been interrogated by the FBI, who have suspicions that they might be on the watch list, who've been confronting travel issues more so than they've ever had, based on their participation in Palestine advocacy, based on their presence in the community, and just broad associations with Arab Americans or Muslims or associated groups. So this watch list case, I would like to clarify, was brought by CAIR National on behalf of a host of plaintiffs, one of which is a plaintiff who resides in New Jersey. He is the lead plaintiff on the case, and in that respect, and in that capacity, CAIR-NJ represents one of the number of other plaintiffs that are listed as plaintiffs on this case. Some of them are in Massachusetts, some of them are in Louisiana, but this case was strategically filed in Massachusetts because of strategic purposes related to the favorability of the law there. So CAIR-NJ is involved in this watch listing lawsuit, and so far as the lead plaintiff, Mayor Khairallah, is a resident and mayor in New Jersey.
Now, can you tell me a little bit about, this isn't the first case that's brought to the Supreme Court or to any US court about the watch list. Can you tell us how this case differs from other cases that we've seen in the past?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, there are other watch list lawsuits that have been filed by affiliates of CAIR, Friends of CAIR, CUNY, and other organizations. This case in particular is the first of its kind that's filed in the First Circuit for reasons, like I said, related to the favorable laws in that circuit, and the likelihood of getting a not an ally federal judge, but not an enemy federal judge. And this lawsuit in particular reveals for the first time that even on the rare occasion that the government removes an individual from the watch list, the individual's past status on a watch list would continue to haunt them for probably the rest of their lives. Federal agencies retain records of past watch list status and use them to deny formally listed individuals access to government buildings, access to security clearance for their jobs, federal employment, license and government benefits, gun licenses, for example. And the lawsuit asserts this lawsuit asserts, like many others before it, that these are violations of the Fifth Amendment due process rights and equal protection under the law, protection against self-incrimination, and protection against long-term detention. These are similar to other watch lists, but this specific watch list is unique in that it argues that past watch list status continues to harm the individual even when the government tries to move out the controversy. Yeah.
Can you expand a little bit more about how it violates Fifth Amendment protections specifically, and how it also violates due process, all these sort of ways that it violates their very basic civil rights. So we know there's a watch list. We know there's several, I believe, 2 million names on the list, the majority of whom are Muslim. But how exactly does it, sometimes like you'll see that, oh, this person's name was removed off the list, so like, why are you upset now? So can you walk us through a little bit more about how it violates those sort of civil liberties and rights?
Yeah, sure. That's a packed question, Dina. I'm going to go into the kind of the specifics of it because the audience here, they are law students, so I hope that you guys can pick up on the language. But to your first question on the constitutional violations, I'd like to first assert that even outside of it being a violation of constitutional rights, it is a racist practice. It uses racist mechanisms to that are used to entrap people in Muslim Americans, Arab Americans, and associated groups, right? So even outside of those constitutional arguments, just keep in mind that this is a racist practice. So even if those constitutional requirements are met, the use of it in itself should be rejected. Meaning any arguments for the reform of it to meet the constitutional standards should still be rejected. But in terms of what the lawsuit argues in constitutional arguments, it is a violation of the Fourth Amendment in that the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution provides that a person shall not be subject to unreasonable searches and seizures, which include detention. So searches of electronic devices, prolonged detention, the searches and the detention of the individuals who are watch listed are done without a warrant, of course. And we see that in other contexts. We've learned from the harms that, if, for example, child protection services have subjected the Black American community to. That's an exception, I guess, carved out for that specific community that gives the government unfettered authority to search and seize and detain and separate people in violation of their Fourth Amendment rights without a warrant. And this is the case here as well. Of course, activists in the Black Lives Matter movement are impacted by the watch list, but for the vast majority of those listed on the group, it is kind of that exception to a warrant that the Fourth Amendment would require that subjects Muslims, the vast majority of those on the list who are Muslim, to searches and seizures without a warrant. I'm going to try to walk back the questions that you asked, but in terms of the Fourth Amendment, yeah. So again, it violates this constitutional guarantee by seizing people who are watch listed, by seizing their devices and forcing them to open those devices, including by providing passwords and by using biometric means such as facial recognition or fingerprints, and by confiscating electronics altogether as a matter of official policy and practice. So, for example, if we see through documents and discovery and through practice through our clients that if the typical person refuses to have their electronic devices searched without probable cause or anything that meets that standard, they are released, right? But if you're watch listed, the government is going to give you a much harder time refusing a search of your electronic devices. And so those who routinely refuse their electronic devices often have their devices confiscated for weeks or months, and sometimes they're never returned at all. And to add further to that violation, the government routinely downloads and copies the contents of the watch listed individuals' electronic devices into their systems, uploads their contents into their watch listing database, and reviews that material in a manner that would constitute a search under the Fourth Amendment and other purposes. They also use this as a means of getting to other individuals, so it causes great tension between those who are watch listed and people who they are associated with, whether that be family members, friends, fellow organizers, anything that kind of the government is able to capture from that database dump exposes friends and loved ones to harm and possibly watch listing status as well. So that's kind of, you know, on the Fourth Amendment, on the Fourth Amendment violation, what Fourth Amendment violations you're exposed to when you're on the watch list. Now on the Fifth Amendment violations, so the Fifth Amendment, as you guys know, covers procedural due process, it covers substantive due process, and it also covers or provides people with protections against self-incrimination. So the government violates these rights and constitutional guarantees by placing plaintiffs and other the plaintiffs on this case, as well as other similarly situated people, including lawful permanent residents and foreign citizens, even on this terrorist screening database. Not only, so when we talk about the watch list, we're talking about the database, but we're also talking about subsets of that database, which include the no-fly list and the selectee list. And this is done, that placement, that process in itself of nominating and placing individuals on the watch list is done without any meaningful process, meaning no notice of the placement is given to the person, no evidence or opportunity to confront the derogatory information that the government so-called relies on to nominate the person onto the watch list, or an opportunity to rebut that derogatory information. And so the government often makes arguments like, well, there's the Homeland Security trip complaint process, that is due process. Well, that's insufficient, the watch list lawsuit argues, because the DHS trip process doesn't give you confirmation of whether or not you're on the watch list. It doesn't give you the process by which they nominated you. It doesn't provide you with the basis for why you were nominated in the first place, or ways in which you can confirm you were removed if you even pursue that recourse. So basically, in essence, this watch list lawsuit argues that the recourse made available to plaintiffs on this lawsuit were either exhausted, insufficient, or even if confirmed through discovery that they were removed from that watch list, their past watch list status continues to cause them harm in pretty much every aspect of their lives.
Can you expand a little bit more on that sort of harm that it causes? So we see like the damages that we see are, part of them are like reputational damage. Some of it is like financial damages if they can't hold down a job. What else? What sort of other damages do they face?
Yeah. That's also the kind of the lawsuit attempts to capture the spectrum of harm that that's caused to plaintiffs, but it really goes beyond what I'm about to tell you. So obviously we know that it causes life-altering consequences because it's widely distributed to other government agencies. So it's not just a terrorist screening center, it's the terrorist screening center and the agencies it allows access to that watch list, which includes Homeland Security and the FBI, and other agencies that either request or are given access to this watch list. This watch list is even given or distributed to foreign ally governments, some of whom have horrific human rights records, and they use this watch list to abuse and manipulate travelers who they can confirm is on this watch list, but who the traveler themselves does not know that they're on. So of course, in those contexts, when travelers are traveling through those foreign government territories and those foreign governments have access to that watch list, they also use that as a basis to torture, in one of the plaintiff's cases, torture the person, keep them for prolonged detention without access to an attorney and so forth. And of course, that causes financial harms, economic harms, including missing their flights, missing the opportunity to be with the their family that they're traveling with, and even, you know, missing the funerals that they're traveling to go attend, or weddings, or, you know, whichever milestone, or, you know, a life event that they're traveling for, or to attend in the first place. So, you know, that's a harm in itself. Now, the stigma that comes from it, the stigma and the harm of watch listing placements lasts a lifetime, even if the government eventually decides that the individual doesn't meet this vague, all-inclusive standard. The choosing to remove them from the watch list doesn't protect them from the humiliation involved with traveling. These secondary screening process, the finger swiping, the calling on dogs to sniff you, these are things that happens to these plaintiffs in public, and so that's humiliating in itself. It happens in front of their children, and sometimes even without, I mean, not sometimes, oftentimes, as an attorney, you're not allowed to access your client in that specific context. You can try, and, you know, attorneys have tried to kind of curtail the length of the process in getting to their clients, but it's very, very difficult in that context, and that creates a heightened level of isolation and humiliation for the person enduring that treatment in public. And of course, I need to mention that there are plaintiffs on this specific lawsuit who have been diagnosed with PTSD because of this level of humiliation, the scrutiny, the being followed, being denied access to certain buildings. And in the case of Mayor Khairallah, for example, his harm, in addition to the many instances of humiliation he's had to experience in front of his children, which, as a grown person who represents an entire town, is quite vulnerable. It exposes him to a very unique level of vulnerability when he's tearing up talking about these experiences. But the harm even extended to the public humiliation of having been denied access to the White House Eid Iftar celebration, which he himself was appointed to coordinate for his community by the Biden administration. So the Biden administration asked this mayor to nominate attendees from the community after he, you know, was extended an invite personally, and then extended other invitations to community members. Once he arrived, he was the only one who was denied access, and that was because of his past watch list status. He was watch listed in 2019, removed, and still continued to face this, you know, utter humiliation as a public figure. It's like, you know, a heightened level of harm. And then, of course, the harms that are related to the tension this causes in the community. The federal government manipulates the community through this process, through guilt by association, presumptions of suspicion on family members, friends, traveling companions. Many Americans, including children, end up targeted by the watch list based on who their mother is, who their father is, what mosque they attend. Just a basic exercise of their constitutional rights to religious freedom, to freedom of association, to freedom of religious belief. So these like leaked government documents reveal that the watch list system, you know, is created for that purpose, to divide and humiliate the community.
Yeah. And so, as you're trying this case, or as you are working on this case, what are the reliefs that you're seeking for, specifically for Mayor Khairallah?
A couple of things that might not be satisfactory in terms of movement lawyering, but in terms of what you're able to request in court, which is providing individuals notice of when they're nominated onto the watch list, providing the individual an opportunity to confront the evidence against them, and then challenge the derogatory information that the government is relying on, and then removing the person from the watch list, but also confirming once they're removed, because once they're removed, there's no confirmation and you're left without any closure. So you continue to anticipate that harm regardless of whether or not you're on the watch list. And then once removed, permanently removing the person from the watch list, expunging the record of having been on the watch list, reforming the system of nomination itself. It cannot be based on these vague and all-inclusive standards of what mosques you attend or what organization you donated to, for example, and then enjoining the government from ultimately renominating the person once they're removed. And that's kind of where we're at in another case that has reached the Supreme Court, that specific issue of renomination.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the standards that the government uses? I know they're vague, but can you walk us through what standards do they use to say this person belongs on the watch list or that person belongs? There's 2 million people on this list. What standard did they use to put all these people on this list?
Mm-hmm. I want to be able to provide the standard, but that's actually the court problem. These are standards that we aren't privy to. Only the government is privy to it. This is a process that is purely done without judicial scrutiny, and it is the continued ask of the government that the judicial branch of the government not be allowed to weigh in on what standards they use. It is their specific authority and purview to nominate individuals on this watch list. Further, sorry, I lost my train of thought. The current there's a sister lawsuit to this lawsuit, which argues that the process by which the task that the government claims they have authority to promulgate this process of watch listing is actually a task that Congress didn't assign to them. There's no statutory basis for this process altogether. There's no responsibility that was assigned to the FBI or the Terrorist Screening Center by Congress to have promulgated this authority to begin with. And so the basis by which they claim they have a complete authority over the scrutiny of the process, which is not disclosed or transparent to the public, is one that does not exist at the behest of Congress. It's an exception to every other responsibility of agencies in the history of this country. It's an exception to that, and the only way that can be enjoined is through a judicial scrutiny into the issue.
And that's part and parcel of the whole issue also, because it's vast overreach of the government into private citizens' lives, and just doing this without any sort of accountability or any sort of standard to be held to. I wanted to ask, would you be able to share if, so I'm thinking right now of the Twombly standard in civil procedure and how that case was kind of just thrown out for technicality purposes. Is this what we're seeing with these with past watch list cases? Like, why do courts rule against them, generally speaking, or what have we seen in the past?
I'm sorry, Dina, you cut in and out, but if I heard the question properly, is how courts have weighed in the past on these issues?
Yes.
The record seems to show that most courts do not go out of their way to limit or curtail the authorities of government agencies, particularly when it comes to agencies that have responsibilities or authorities over national security interests. And so that's the constant circular argument that the government has made in almost all these cases, is that they're tasked with the specific authority of securing the American public and protecting national security interests. And that specific responsibility is not extended to the judiciary. And in fact, it is one of the only exceptions to any challenge, whether that be by the plaintiff themselves who's being harmed by this process, or the request by plaintiff's attorneys that courts weigh in on it. The only kind of throughway out of that scrutiny is by claiming they have absolute authority over issues of national security, and that transparency, the request for the transparency in itself would expose the public to harm. But to be clear, the standard again is unknown, but we do in fact know that the suspicions do not arise out of any records or records of arrests, any criminal history, or any association with anything that might even point to terrorist activities. So the argument is kind of opaque and kind of has shielded them from scrutiny and accountability for until now.
Okay, I do want to leave some time for questions, so I'll wrap up with one last question, Ayah. Where are we right now with the civil procedure of the case? What's the latest on it, on Mayor Khairallah's case specifically?
So we're still in the discovery phase. Thankfully, there hasn't been a dismissal of the case, which is also something that a lot of these watch list lawsuits don't prevail under. So the discovery phase will take a couple of months. So we're still at the very beginning. No arguments have been made on the merit yet.
Thank you, Ayah. I do want to open it up to questions, but before I do that, I see that Lisa Davis has a question. She's left it in the chat. I think it's more of a rhetorical question, but she's saying, so you mean we the people have no idea as to why someone is even on the watch list, and we don't even know the criteria for being put on a watch list, which I think you kind of already went over. But I see over here Mehreen is saying, what can we do as law students to support your work?
That's a great question, Mehreen. I do think like most of these watch list suits and most of these kind of like big issue lawsuits, recovery and justice comes more from public pressure than from how judges determine the case. Public pressure on, I mean, one, these lawsuits take forever, right? So we can be waiting for several years to hear on the resolution of this specific case. But in addition to that, we can see from past lawsuits, and we can see from movement lawyering in general, that public pressure on the administrative branch, the executive branch is actually one of the most effective means of bringing attention and resolve to issues like this. So if the Biden administration, much like with the genocide happening right now, if the Biden administration seeks to end the watch list, they can do so within a day. And that comes from public pressure. It doesn't come from the judicial branch. So if law students want to contribute to this type of work, I would suggest you keep this issue at the forefront of your class discussions, at the forefront of your movements. Most of these issues are inextricably linked from one another. The impact this has had on, for example, Palestine advocacy, on activists who are more on the left. Anyone associated with these powerful movements are subject and vulnerable to being on this watch list. So whenever you can keep this question and issue alive in your discussions and in your public demands, I would suggest that would be the most effective way to resolve this constitutional issue.
Sure. Thank you, Ayah. We have a question from George, and he's asking, at this stage of the procedure, what kind of legal documents have you submitted already? What about the federal government, the opposing party? What kind of legal documents, motions, etc., are you anticipating that they will submit this year?
That's a good question, George. So I'm gonna be transparent. I am the attorney for one of the plaintiffs, Mayor Khairallah from Prospect Park. So I'm pulled in insofar as when the discovery starts on his specific case facts, then I'm privy to the process. But other than that, I don't think that they have moved past a motion, of course, the motion to dismiss phase of the case, to my knowledge, but I can confirm with you or for you.
Thank you, Ayah. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Sorry, do we have one coming in? No. Okay, well, how is this? Oh, George, how is this a women's rights issue? So it is a bit of a, like, it's a bit of an intersectional issue in that it touches on, it's a very layered issue. So how, can you walk us through a bit more of like the intersectionality of it?
Yeah, for sure. Um, I would say it's an issue on many fronts. It's a disability issue, it's a women's issue. Most of these plaintiffs are plaintiffs who've been humiliated in front of their families, their children, separated from their spouses. One of the plaintiffs himself is like permanently exiled in Saudi Arabia because he cannot fly over US space. So of course, that has a material impact on his family, specifically his wife, who now holds, who holds down the fort and is financially contributing to the household to keep supporting their children until there's a resolve to get him back. So it's a women's issue insofar as the separation of the of women from their financial supporters and from their partner in the household, impacts them on a daily basis. It's a disability issue because it causes actual trauma. There are plaintiffs on this watch list who have been diagnosed with PTSD. There are people on this watch list who themselves have a pre-existing disability who are denied access to medication while they're traveling, because they're detained for a prolonged period, who travel on wheelchairs and despite being physically disabled are still subject to this horrific treatment and isolation. And one of the plaintiffs on another lawsuit, actually, who is wheelchair bound, was refused access to his painkillers. It's most definitely a disability issue. It's a family separation issue. It's a workers issue. Those who are, reliant on a career of, truck driving, and their security clearances have been disrupted by being watchlisted for seemingly no reason at all, have had their livelihoods cut short, and they're and bound to unemployment. So yeah, it is definitely an issue that touches on every marginalized community.
And I see we have a few more questions coming in. Mehreen is asking, how long do you think the suit is going to continue for?
I can't say for sure, but past lawsuits like this have gone for years.
Are people, this is from Lisa Davis, are people even notified when they are being put on the watch list? Kind of went over that.
No, you're not notified at any point of the process. You're not notified if you're nominated onto the watch list. You kind of, as an attorney working on cases like this, you kind of have to determine with your client whether or not they're watch listed based on a criteria of like symptoms, that usually point to a person being watch listed, but there's no confirmation. If the government chooses to remove you for any reason, your removal from the watch list is not confirmed. And even when you are removed without confirmation, you continue to face harm. So it almost doesn't matter whether or not you're confirmed removed.
Yeah. I have a question now, actually, if there's no more questions in the chat. So you touched on this a little bit earlier, but right now we're seeing this, a huge, oh, sorry, Janine has a question. Janine, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I was gonna say, can you elaborate as to why the harms continue after people may or may not have been removed off of the watch list? How do the harms of the watch list continue?
Yeah, for several reasons, Janine. One of them being that because this watch list is so pervasively shared with other agencies and governments, oftentimes those agencies retain those watch lists without update on the status of that watch list. They can hold on to an old watch list and not be notified by the terrorist screening center that they're using an old watch list. The second reason is that once you have something like that on your record, that suspicion that you might be associated with terrorist activities, it's a stigma that lasts forever, and you almost need security clearance with everything. So that is kind of like a permanent harm that you can't escape once nominated. So yeah, foreign governments have access to stale watch lists that they're still using.
I remember when Mayor Khairallah's case first came out, about when he was denied access entry into the White House. Folks were saying that the watch list is out of date, that watch lists are no longer in use, that we're 20 plus years post 9/11. Can you tell us a little bit about how this, watch lists have a historic presence here in the US pre 9/11, but they've obviously been ramped up post 9/11, and how the argument that we're in a post 9/11 era now is really, as we're seeing, is pretty invalid.
Yeah, sorry, Dina, the question is,
As if when people say that the watch list, it's dated, it's not used as much anymore, what would you say to that argument? Or the people, when they say that it's just not like an issue today as it was immediately after 9/11?
okay, yeah, I would completely reject that on the ground experience level. Like the number of people that have come to our office with issues related to symptoms of being on the watch list, which again we can't confirm unless we do, raise suit on behalf of all of them. But it very much has metastasized, I would say, since its creation. It's become even worse. The kind of the emboldened ways in which the watch list has been used against every community member right now seems to suggest that the crime by association to Muslim Palestinian communities has been used against people more so now more than ever, especially if you're vocal in politics. People who don't even know what the watch list is, people who've never spoken on politics before the last 6 months have found themselves stuck in this situation where they're held up in secondary screening, or they're denied a boarding pass, or they're being questioned and visited by the FBI in ways they've never imagined and only have read about. And I would say that these types of cases have been more prevalent in our offices, in a way similar, if not more than the 9/11 atmosphere.
Yeah, definitely. Janine, you had a question?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, it's super clear and obvious that this was something that's mainly to target the Muslim community. Do we have any evidence or any stories of other communities that are being targeted? And like, have we seen it creep outwards?
Yeah. Yes, so I would say mainly the watch list is comprised of like around 98% Muslim or Muslim sounding names, but for sure, there are people on that watch list that were prominent Black Lives Matter protesters and organizers, and like more like politically left individuals. But again, those are more so people who are entrapped by this process. It was definitely designed to capture more Muslim and Muslim adjacent people. But that doesn't exclude the very real reality that other communities have been victim to this watch list too.
Yeah. Brian Zambrano had a question in the chat, and he's asking, or they're asking, they are asking, what are the sort of symptoms that would indicate that you're on the watch list, and what's the best recourse for you?
So it's a pretty extensive screening process, Brian, that I think if you or someone you know are experiencing, I would definitely recommend reaching out to our office. But generally, those symptoms are persistent travel issues every time you travel, domestic or international, issues crossing land borders, inability to print your boarding pass, inability without checking in person, inability to check in, period, secondary screening at security, extra swabbing at security, being met by agents at the gate, even post security, being interrogated upon arrival back to the US, being visited or contacted by the FBI frequently, being denied clearance to certain buildings, being denied a gun license. Those are kind of testers to the symptoms we try to document in order to determine whether there's a likelihood you're on the watch list.
I know that Lisa has her hand up. You want to ask a question, Lisa?
Yes, first of all, again, I just want to thank you all so much for the work that you're doing, for having this. I'm not an attorney, but somehow I was on your email list and I said, oh, let me register for this. So I'm very happy to be here. But I also wanted to do this because I'm very involved in the community locally, and I feel that these struggles are so important. Like that just happens to be a picture from me a couple of years ago. But to the question that somebody asked when they wanted to know how this is affecting other communities, I can say from firsthand experience, the people I know right now, like the head of one of the organizations that I belong to, is currently facing 10 to 15 years in prison because, and in 2022, the FBI raided his home and the offices in St. Louis and in St. Petersburg, Florida, and it's based on the fact that he condemned the United States' role in the Russia-Ukraine war and conflict, and basically that's it. And then he was accused of interfering with elections, ran people on platforms of reparations. So when I heard about this, and because this is local to me, New Jersey, I'm in New Jersey, the Newark area, I just felt it was so important to really be connected, because I've been trying to do that, and especially, I was trying to do that before, but even more so now that we see this horrible, horrible nightmare horror unfolding right before our eyes in Palestine. So I just wanted to say that is one way, and that is currently going on right now. Trials is expected. They got a trial date for September 3rd. And I think it's going to be in Florida. So, I would like to just put the website in the chat, but these are things we have to know about because they are, I feel about the people we don't even know. We're going through stuff like this. I know with Cop City and what's going on there. And so we're going to be planning various activities to bring awareness. It's just horrible what's going on, but not unusual. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. We actually, I believe last week or the week before, we had a talk with Mark Lamont Hill about how a lot of the experiences of Black people here in the US and Palestine liberation movements, a lot of their experiences overlap in that way. They're not the same, but they overlap in many different ways. So thank you for sharing that. And then I think we have one last question in the chat right now. Thank you for sharing the link, Lisa. So Rena's asking, would they add people to the watch list who are just posting consistently about Palestine, or do you need to have a huge following?
I don't know that I can say there's a specific criteria, Rena. I think that a lot of people who end up on the watch list genuinely don't know why they were nominated. To Janine's question earlier about the continued harm, there are people on the watch list that have been mistakenly added to the watch list, or a mix-up of names, a misspelling, a very dull agent checking off the wrong box, which happened in a prior case where, like the people employed by these agencies are not the brightest people. And so it could be a pure error or a pure unfounded decision to be placed on. So I don't know if I can say there's for definitively whether posting about Palestine will expose you to that possibility. But certainly we do know that there are people who have been contacted more frequently by the FBI for their participation in being outspoken against the genocide. I don't know if they are on the watch list, but you know, it does invite more scrutiny for sure.
I mean, it also goes to show again, like that there is no actual standard that we're aware of, at least. So you don't know which landmine, like we don't know where the landmines are. You don't know where you're gonna step on. Brian has a question and he's asking, besides the constitutional protections that may be cited in a lawsuit like this, are there any international protections for human and civil rights?
That's a good question. I mean, besides, I guess, human rights organizations being vocal about harms that are done onto victims of the watch list when they're being tortured abroad because of their status or something like that. I think domestically, constitutional arguments are going to be the most cited in these types of lawsuits.
Yeah. And then it's also like, it goes to show again that a lot of these, the countries that this watch list is shared with, they often have like vile human rights records. So it continues to put people at continued risk, etc. Rana, I see your hand, but I'm just gonna read out Lisa's question in the chat. How can we keep abreast of what is going on with this?
With this specific watch list lawsuit, Lisa, I think anytime there's an update, CAIR-NJ Jersey specifically and CAIR National will be posting those updates through either press releases or our listserv. So I do recommend that you register to our listserv if you would like an update on this specific lawsuit.
Rana, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I have a quick question. Again, sorry. I don't know if you answered this already, but if there's no criteria to the watch list, what are they basing it on? Like, are they just, because wouldn't that be like discrimination or something like that? Like, what are they basing putting people on the watch list on? Like, wouldn't that be harassment if they're basing it on something, you know, kind of dumb?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think most of movement attorneys who are active on challenging the watch list as even a project of the Department of Justice reject any reform arguments, because at its core it is a racist mechanism. It nominates people for existing and participating in constitutionally protected activities, for being associated with certain for going to pray in certain mosques, for donating to certain causes. These are all reasons that would invite suspicion onto you by the Department of Justice. And so by that very premise, it's a racist process. And so even if we do kind of, if the government does is enjoined from doing this further and reforms the process by which they are able to meet the constitutional standards required of them, the continuation of the process itself, it remains a racist one.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ayah. Lisa has one more question. Can organizations give support in any way? I suppose you could support CAIR-NJ Jersey's work by amplifying our work, by donating if you would like to. But yeah, I think you can.
Also, like, if you'd like to invite our organization to give like a KYR for your specific community on how to interact safely with law enforcement, on what your rights are in the context of traveling and in protests and these various contexts that are impacted by the existence of the watch list, please feel free to do that. We do it free of charge, and if your community needs it, we can provide that.
Okay. Thank you, Ayah, for this great conversation. And thank you everyone for joining us. This will be posted onto our YouTube channel. But if nobody has any other questions, we will close out the night.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks all.
Just want to make sure I'm kept on your email list.
Yes, Lisa, if you would like to ensure that you are on our email list, you can go to our website, CAIR-NJ.org, and our email list sign up sheet is on the website, so you can just put in your email just to be sure that you're on our list.
Okay, and thank you so very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.